Welcome everybody. Good morning, or I guess it's afternoon somewhere. Call and response. We're going to take some questions. I got a few already lined up here, but you can put your questions into the chat. And nice to see you all here. Hello, Jeff McErlane. Crashing my class. Love it. And nice to see some other folks from membership and some other folks I don't know. So feel free to post. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what you're interested in talking about. And we'll do this. So questions about fingerstyle blues. The first question I got, of course, was not a question about how to play. It was a question about gear. So let's do that, because I almost never talk about gear. I leave that to the professionals like Jeff. But I'll keep an eye out on the chat as well for more questions as they come in. But the first question I got was, how do I amplify my acoustic guitar? And I'm happy to talk about that. This is not actually the guitar that I play live with that much anymore. Of course, I haven't played live at all lately. But when I do, the main instrument I use is the Collings, which I use in a bunch of TrueFire videos, and I've used a little bit here on the channel. And for that, the thing about acoustic guitar and making it sound good is getting it loud and getting it to still sound like a guitar, right? So a lot of people, including myself, use a combination of sources to make it sound good. And I don't endorse any of these things. I mean, I just use what I use. What I use right now on the Collings is I have a pickup under the saddle. It's made by a company called K and K, like K ampersand K. So a K and K pickup under the saddle. And then in the sound hole, I actually have a Fishman, I think it's called the Rare Earth. So it's magnetic. It's got a magnetic pickup, like, just sitting there in the sound hole. And then it's got a little microphone that ducks down into the guitar. And so that's basically three sources, right? Because you've got the magnetic pickup, you've got the microphone, and you've got the piezo. I think it's a piezo. If it's not, it's something really similar to a piezo design. Anyway, those three things are all wired together to one end pin jack. And so you get two lines, basically like a stereo signal, one for the magnetic and one for the saddle. And then you can get a cord, well, I do, that basically takes that stereo signal and then splits it out into two mono signals again. So you only have one cord coming out of your guitar. You don't have to punch any holes in the guitar for a second jack. The one cord goes out, it splits into two, and then from there, what I do is run it into a gizmo called the Red Eye, which is made by a great designer here in engineer and designer here in Austin. And there's a mono Red Eye, but you can also, he made a two-channel one. So it was designed so that you could A/B and switch between two different instruments on stage. But the way I use it is to use both channels for the guitar, which means that you have independent volume and like a tone roll off for each side. And so you can run that parallel. And so it goes into the Red Eye, and the Red Eye has both an XLR out, so you can go straight to the PA, and it has an effects loop. And so from the Red Eye, I go out through the effects loop to a little bit of processing, some of which I don't always even use, but basically, like, I have a parametric EQ and I have a little bit of reverb and a little bit of delay. So if I'm playing like an ensemble situation and I want it to have a little more body and a little more presence, then I'll use a little bit of the effects. And it's basically, since I know this stuff matters if you're thinking about gear, it's an Empress parametric EQ, and it's both the reverb and the delay are TC Electronics. It's the mini version of the Hall of Fame and the mini version of whatever the TC Electronics delay is, and that's it. So that's the whole rig. That's how I do it. As far as what this guitar has in it, I've had this guitar since the 90s, and so when the very first Fishman blender came out, I got that installed, and so it has a Fishman passive piezo pickup here, and it has a Crown mini microphone here, and it's the same idea. The blender took a stereo signal and split it into two channels so you could adjust them independently. And the idea was, if you're in a loud situation and things are feeding back, you can turn off the microphone or turn it down and just rely on the pickup. So that is how I amplify my acoustic guitar. All right, there are a bunch of questions here, so I will try and look at them and see what's going on. Let's see. Okay. Okay, here's some questions about course material. Practicing. Cool. Let's see. And a question about finger or thumb picks. Okay, excellent. Okay, these are great. I'll try to go through these. Some of these are about teaching material, and that's fine. I don't want to feel like an infomercial, but I'm happy to talk about what I teach and where and how I teach it. So from Robert, never played fingerstyle before and wondering if any of the TrueFire courses would complement the Fingerstyle 5 membership, which he is already in. You know, the main thing that's different about the TrueFire stuff is it's more repertoire, right? It's more material. And the funny thing is that for the TrueFire material, like those were all done without thinking about, you know, most people who make educational stuff, books and videos, like we don't have legal access to copywritten material. Like, you know, it'd be great to do like, you know, to teach a whole bunch of like, I don't know, Robert Johnson songs on the TrueFire lessons, but you can't do it because those are subject to copyright. Unlike some earlier blues stuff, all the stuff I do in the Fingerstyle 5 membership has been public domain, stuff that's old enough that like everybody, you know, there's no one claim of authorship to it. So the TrueFire stuff, I basically wrote a bunch of blues tunes and etudes and exercises. And I'm always kind of surprised when someone will like post or write me an email and say like, hey, I performed this song of yours the other day at my gig. And I'm like, really? Like, those aren't real songs. I just made them up, you know, but people will play them. And so there's a lot of, I mean, the TrueFire stuff is just like, if you just want more stuff to work on, more songs. I mean, we do a new tune basically every month in the Fingerstyle 5 membership. But if you want more than that, then the TrueFire stuff would give you that to work on. But I also really recommend, like I always send people to Ken Perlman's Art of, I think it's just called Fingerstyle Guitar by Ken Perlman. That's a great book. You know, it's an older book, so there's no video. I think there might be audio at this point. I'm not sure. And the other place I always recommend, other resource, excuse me, it's always allergy season in Austin. The other resource I always recommend is The Art of Ragtime Guitar by Richard Saslow, which is 9 alternating thumb fingerstyle tunes in the ragtime style. They're not transcriptions of like, you know, Maple Leaf Rag or anything like that. They're written to be guitar pieces in the ragtime style. And they're more in the sort of like guitar ragtime. It's kind of like if someone like Blind Boy Fuller wrote like really sophisticated chord changes. You know, they're more of like a, they have more of a swing feel than like classic, you know, piano ragtime stuff, which is very sort of formal and straight eights. But it's a great collection of repertoire, great collection of tunes to work on. So Art of Ragtime Guitar, Richard Saslow. It's back in print. You can find it on Amazon. It's a great book, and I learned a ton of those tunes when I was growing up, and they taught me a lot of voicings and a lot of cool bass moves and all kinds of things like that. But as far as the TrueFire stuff, like, it's more repertoire. But the Fingerstyle 5 itself focuses more on sort of building like this broad set of skills to put songs together yourself. And I can talk about that more if you want, but that's, you know, the Fingerstyle 5 is more about like how to grow and develop your improvisation skills, how to get better at actually learning tunes and strengthening your groove, getting your thumb and fingers to do their thing, be coordinated, how to improvise, all that kind of stuff. Okay. And this is a great one from Gail, who was also in the Fingerstyle 5. But she says, you've probably addressed this elsewhere, but core elements of a solid fingerstyle practice regimen. Okay, great question. My ideas about practicing come from the fact that I can't sit and practice for hours at a time. I never have been able to do that. The closest I can get is to be working on like something for like 30 or 40 minutes and then work on something completely different for 30 or 40 minutes. And I can maybe do that a couple of times in a morning. But for the most part, my thing is like, what's the least I can get away with, and therefore least amount of time I can get away with, and therefore what is the most efficient way that I can practice. And the reason for that is because if you start thinking of practicing as something that takes 2 hours a day, you're not going to sit down and do it, right? If you think like, do I have 2 hours clear in my schedule? No, I do not. Well, I guess I'm not practicing today. But if you think of practicing as something that takes half an hour, you can carve out time for that. You can go, well, I think I can find a half an hour. I used to say, like, you could sit and watch Gilligan's Island for a half an hour, or you could practice, but now nobody watches anything on a schedule, right? Like, nobody shows up at a particular time to do a particular thing on TV, so it's not as relevant. But so the idea is like to say, sort of work, like reverse engineer what you're going to work on by starting with like, how much are you going to practice? When is it going to happen? Right? Carving out the time is half the battle. And so if you say, okay, it's a small amount of time, it's half an hour, and it's going to happen like on weekdays, maybe that's the only time that you can actually find that half an hour for yourself. Maybe the weekend is just like a total toss up, but so 5 days a week that's cool. That's more than no days a week, right? So you start with that of saying, okay, I'm going to practice half an hour a day. And then you say, well, what do I got to work on? And that just depends on where you're at. But when people ask me what to work on, my answer is usually the annoying question response, which is, what do you want to get good at? Like, why are you practicing? What do you want to be doing? Like, it's no good saying like, oh, I heard I should learn the modes, or I heard I should learn jazz, or I heard I should be faster. Like, maybe, but only if, that's part of what you're trying to do. What's the big picture? What are you trying to do? Most fingerstyle guitar players that I run across want to know more songs and want to be able to play them better. And often express that as like, well, I want to be able to just sit and make stuff up. I want to be able to play. I want to just be able to like express myself and just like, sit on the porch and do something groovy. And so I think of that as like working backwards. Like, you've got to have tunes. Like, it basically comes down to like, what songs are you going to learn and what are you going to learn to do on them? And at some level, it's just a matter of, well, I can't learn how to play a tune without stumbling. And so the practice should be focused on getting your thumb and your fingers coordinated, getting a better sense of time, which might mean working with a metronome or learning how to really break down a song so that, your thumb, what your thumb is doing first, and then you know how your fingers are interacting with that, and then you know how to kind of start slowly putting that together. But if you already can play tunes and your issue is, well, every time I play the song, I play it the exact same way, or I only play these same 10 songs over and over again, then that becomes a question of like, well, how can you make the songs you play more interesting? And so that becomes a question of like, can you learn how to arrange a song? Can you learn how to improvise on it? Can you learn how to have more fun playing the repertoire you have, and then slowly adding to that repertoire? So a practice regimen, you could basically, whatever your goal is, like, you need to find the time, first of all, and then you need to figure out what the big purpose of the practicing is. Because just sitting down to practice, nobody picks up the guitar to be a practicer, right? You pick up the guitar to play. So practicing is the way to get good at the thing you want to be able to do. So it should be based on working backwards from the thing you want to do. So if your thing is you want to be able to play more songs, then it's like, well, how do I practice songs? And we all know from having tried it and failed that just playing the songs over and over every day doesn't make you better at them. I mean, you gradually remember them, but you still make mistakes in the same places, and you still forget the things that you forget. So you need to figure out a way to practice that will help you take those tunes apart and put them back together, right? So Lawrence Juber did a clinic once that I saw where someone asked him kind of the same thing, and he said, the way that he practices, and this is a guy with like a ton of tunes in his repertoire, and he's got like concerts he's got to give and records he's got to make and all that. But his way of doing it was, he said, basically I pull out a tune that I play and I play through it once. I just play it like I was performing it. But as I go, I'm making mental notes about the places where I'm screwing up. He He said, then I go through and I pick a few of those spots and I just work on those, like the little, like, oh, getting from this chord to that chord, or, you know, fixing that, or, you know, I can't ever play this cleanly. He said, I go and I try to clean up a few of the trouble spots. And then the third thing I do is I play through the song again and I don't stop, right? Because he's practicing performing it, but he's also taking it up and putting it on the lift and looking at what's screwed up and like spending a little time adjusting it and then like bringing it back down and playing it again and then moving on. So that's one way you can do it. I teach a specific approach in the membership called the horizontal 3-step, where it's basically 3 steps. If you're learning a song, it's like, what's the bass doing? And so, like, if you're playing, you know, I was playing at the beginning of today's session, I was playing CC Rider, because that's a song that I'm in the middle of teaching online, and so I had that on my mind. And it's basically a blues in E, but the bass does a couple of tricky things. So the bass is going like this. So I'm like, well, let's isolate that and make sure it's really solid. And then, what's the melody doing? Okay, it's doing these double stops. And they're syncopated. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 3. Right? And it feels like you're taking all the fun out of it, but sitting there and really figuring out, like, where does this fall over the beat? And for most tunes like this, you're really not getting any more granular than eighth notes. And you're looking at stuff in terms of like, well, it's just a count of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. If you can count, you can work out the time. And everything is going to be either on the beat or off the beat. It's going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4, or it's going to be on an and. So, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1. So that's very syncopated. But once you've learned that and you've really gone like, oh, that's what it's doing, then you go back to the thumb, which is spelling out 1, 2, 3, 4. And you put together, like the thumb is basically like marking out the beats, and so the fingers have something to play off. That's a pinch, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1. So now it's just instead of just looking at the tab and trying to feel your way through it, you've got something objective that you can actually work on. 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, right? And you can break down any fingerstyle thing like that. Even if it gets kind of busy and hairy. And that's not to say you're not going to then go and play in a more intuitive, expressive, loose kind of way. But if you've got the foundation pinned down, man, when you go to play the melody, it's going to sound rock solid. You're going to play with, like, you know, confidence and conviction, which is really important, right? That's the thing. You don't want to feel hesitant. You want to feel like this is where it goes. I remember taking guitar lessons with Emily Remler when I was like 22, and I was like in way over my head, right? But you know, she was the first guitar player I heard talk about the idea of having good time and knowing where the time was. And she taught me a lot about practicing with the metronome. But the main thing she said was like, you know, I want to be able to, you know, I don't want to be waiting around for the drummer or the bass player to have the time. Like, I want to be able to say, time is here. This is where the pulse is. This is where the groove is. This is what we're playing. And to be able to express that with your playing. So really sitting down and getting into the weeds with like where the beat is and where the ands are, and using a metronome to really like mark out where the pulse is, that's how you get to where you can play those songs solidly. And there's nothing contradictory to me about getting really like that scientific about playing blues, because when you have the time and the feel dialed in, then you're freer to be expressive with it. If you know that, if you've practiced the melody and you can put it right on the beat, then you can start to syncopate it. And then if you start to put in something weirder, even if you stumble over that trickier lick, if you know where the time is, you can get back onto the groove right away. That's a very discursive way of talking about practicing. But really, it's just, you know, figure out when you're going to practice, figure out how long you're going to practice for, figure out why you're practicing, and then base your your practice regimen on the things you want to get good at. I can talk about this all day, and I'm happy to do it both here and in the membership. So Gail, if that didn't answer your question, just keep asking. Okay, what else? Okay, there was a question about thumb picks. Oh, can I turn on my vocal mic a little bit? Yes, I can. This is the mechanical way to do it. And, oh, it's, well, stop me if the stream gets too slick and professional. Vocal, which one is the vocal one going into? It's going into this one. That should be a little louder. That might have been the guitar. Okay, let's see if that helps. Okay. Okay, so the question about thumb picks and finger picks, but I want to sort of read ahead and see. Oh, really good question here about two acoustics. I'm going to get to that one. String gauges, awesome. Bass fronts, and call and response pentatonic licks. Okay, lots of good questions here. We are not going to be done in half an hour. Talking about the guitar that I am holding. Hand placement for picking. Okay, we got tons of stuff to discuss. Great. Okay, yeah, it's a double. I'll do this one quickly. This is a 0018 from 1956. It's a spruce top, mahogany back and sides, and I got it at Mandolin Brothers in the 90s after it just had a neck reset, and it's a rockin' guitar. Okay, let me go through these. Do I use a thumb pick, or thoughts on thumb pick and bare thumb, or finger picks? I did play with a thumb pick and two finger picks for a while. I did it until good pickups were invented. I mean, I used to play a big old Yamaha Dreadnought, and I actually played gigs in a place that didn't have a PA. So to be loud, I would wear a thumb pick and finger picks. And the main thing I got out of using the thumb pick was the angle of my hand, because with a thumb pick, you have to hold your thumb kind of parallel to the guitar. And that, to me, helps you get good palm muting, right? Resting your hand on where the bridge and the strings meet, and getting that bass thump. And the reason for that is to get some distinction and clarity between the bass and the melody, right? If you're playing, it's the difference between sounding that kind of approach that people like, I'm blanking on his name, John Fahey, right? Doing that kind of, the thumb is not touching the face of the guitar, right? And the bass is really wide open. And I know that's not really what John Fahey sounds like, but it's kind of like the cartoon in my head of what's going on, which is the thumb is really wide open, the bass is ringing out as much as the notes on top. And to me, it just ends up sounding like a lot more arpeggiated and more like pattern picking. Even though you can really hear the melody, it just sounds folkier to me. And what I want for my own playing is more of a distinction where the bass has this drier, thumpier character. So that it sounds like blues licks over this thumpy groove. So the thumb pick helps get that, but I ultimately, like once you could play an acoustic guitar and you could amplify it well enough that you didn't need volume from the picks, I got rid of them because what was happening was I was working out stuff at home without the picks because I only wore them to play gigs. And then when I got to the gig, I realized I suddenly was losing a finger because I was intuitively playing with my index, middle, and ring finger. Not my pinky, but these three. And then I would put the picks on, and it was never occurred to me to put a pick on my ring finger. And the couple times I tried it, it just felt incredibly awkward. So I just realized I didn't really dig it. Losing the access to the ring finger. And also I started listening more to people, paying more attention to what people I liked, like Roy Bookbinder was doing. And they were playing barehanded and doing all these kind of like really like snaps and rakes and different things that really were about this very direct contact of the fingers with the guitar. And I liked that better. I liked the feel of it, and it made me feel more connected to the strings, and so I just kind of bagged. the thumb pick. But, you know, a lot of people that I really admire use a thumb pick, and especially if they come out of like the Chet school, then the thumb pick's a big part of it usually. And it sounds great. So it's a really personal choice. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. Sort of lost track. Okay, there was the thumb pick one. Okay, I hope the vocal mic is louder now. Jackson, have been following since Notes on Call. That is a long time ago. Okay, hello, Anton. Oh, yes, so thoughts on two acoustics playing fingerstyle blues together in two different tunings. Any benefit in that? Well, that's a really good question, also from Jackson. A lot of times when you see two acoustic guitar players playing together, you'll see one of them capo. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because you get different chord shapes. Like, here, let me grab one. You know, if someone's playing in D, right, drop D has a very characteristic sound. Oh, I did that backwards. Sorry. If someone's playing an E, then I might want to play in drop D, but capo with the second fret. So I'll get different voicings. You know, I'll get that voicing with the third and the bass for the 4 chord, and then different kinds of bass moves. I can go further up the neck. And still keep the alternating thumb going. In fact, I recently did some lessons on playing 9-pound hammer. And of course, you're supposed to play it in E. So the version everybody thinks about now is Tommy Emmanuel's because he's amazing and his version has become pretty definitive. And he does it in E, and he takes it through like all kinds of paces when he plays it live. So I was like, okay, well, why invite comparison to that? Let's see what happens if you put it in D. And it's not that different, right? But it gives it a little bit of a different vibe and a different flavor. So, if you were playing with someone else and they were playing an E, you could capo and play in D shapes, and that would be kind of cool. And different tunings, sure. It just depends how many chord changes are involved. If it's really just sort of 1, 4, and 5, and maybe a couple minor chords, then you can totally get away with it. If someone's playing if they're playing. You go to an open tuning, it's not going to be a fair fight. Like, you're just going to be struggling all over the place to find those voicings. At least I would. Pierre Bensoussan, that's another story. That guy can play anything in Dadgad and make it sound amazing. But he's made the choice to make that his home tuning. So, for two guitar stuff, I think my first move would be a capo, and my second move would be some kind of simple alteration like drop D, and then third resort would be like actually retuning to like, D or G or something like that. But I love two guitar stuff. It sounds a little dated to me now. Like, I recently went back and listened to some of it, and I was like, oh, I didn't notice like all the gizmos on some of the tracks. But those John Renbourn and Stefan Grossman duets were some of my favorite records when I was learning to play. And those guys, I think, do a lot of it just in standard tuning, just playing across from each other and interacting like that, and it sounds really great. So those are some really good duet records to check out. Okay, let's see. That was interesting. What strings are better for fingerstyle blues? This is from Salmon. I hope I'm saying that right. O10s or O11s? Again, total personal preference. I like 10. Well, no, what do I like? I like 12s actually. I've got a 12 on top and a 50 something on the bottom. They're basically John Pierce phosphor bronze light gauge. So for acoustic guitar, light means a 12 on top. But the thing is, one of the reasons I play this guitar and play the callings that I play, which is what is it? It's an O2H, I think, double O2H, is that they're short scale guitars, which means the distance from the bridge to the nut is just under, it's 24 inches and change as opposed to 25 inches and change. So it's just under 25 inches as opposed to a dreadnought or even an OM, which is a little bit longer. And that difference is small, but it makes the guitar feel a little springier and a little easier to play to me than a dreadnought or an OM, which feels kind of stiff to me with 12s. So I guess if I was playing a longer scale guitar, I might, go to 11s or something. But I play the strings till they break, so it's a little bit irrelevant what I like. But I like having a little bit of snap and resistance to work against, because I pick kind of hard at times, and 13s are way too much. I know probably bluegrass guys on their dreadnoughts are playing 13s to punch out as much volume as possible, but 12s seem like the right thing to me. Cool. Okay, from Sam. The most challenging thing for me is to properly mute the bass line runs while playing the melody lines on the treble strings. Yeah. So I'm not sure exactly what kind of bass you're talking about. But yeah, if you're doing something like this. It's really, I'm just trying to sort of think about what's involved. It's just that palm muting thing, but it's just getting the position of the hand so that you've got the bottom 3 strings kind of thumpy, and then the back of the, like you're rocked back just enough that the high strings are going to ring out. So it's just kind of the shape of your hand and the way it's angled. And they're not totally muted, right? And so sometimes I'll, recommend just kind of sliding your hand around so you can find that spot where like you're not letting too much sound out and you're not cutting off too much sound. And just sort of finding that place. And as you play, you are kind of doing a little bit of this with your hand, just kind of moving down a little bit. Like when you go to the A chord, the hand's going to be a little closer to the ground. And then when you get back to the E, you're going to be pulling back a little bit, right? It's kind of dynamic. It's not just going to be one place that you're planted. You kind of have to roll a little bit with what you're doing. And so it's getting that palm muting position in place in the first place that kind of sets the whole thing off. But if there's more about that I'm not covering, let me know and I'll try to talk about it a little more. Okay. Okay, I either don't mute the bass strings enough or hit the treble strings too. Yeah, well, again, I think it's kind of, you can practice on one chord on a couple of strings, like set up some kind of little bass line and then just look at the top string. Don't try to play the whole thing. Like this is a good example of kind of isolating something. Like make sure the bass line is doing what you want it to do, that you're muted the way you want and you're playing on a couple of different strings, and then just practice playing open high strings on the downbeat. And then go down to the second string. And then finally the third string. Or just play it open. You know? Right? And so then go over to the A string and see what happens. And then go back and forth. You do all that before you start worrying about playing licks on top. So yeah, good. Yeah, try that. Good question. Okay. I have to keep scrolling around here. So let's see. From Robert, can you go over some call and response pentatonic licks and how they can be used with the chord substitutions lesson I took? Sure. Yeah. So did this workshop on chord substitutions, talking about different ways to get through a 12-bar blues using these Freddie Green chord voicings. So you're going to be keeping a steady bass going no matter what, because even if you're moving the voicings around, the thumb is still just doing this, basically. So you can think about, it all really depends on having a sense of phrasing. And one of the things that I talk about a lot is, taking there's really only 4 or 5 kinds of licks you can play on blues if you're thinking about in terms of like what's going on rhythmically, right? So you can have like a short, and all of these phrases, the whole point is that licks it's not so much what you play on the chord, it's the way that the phrase takes you into the next chord, the way it resolves. So instead of playing sort of inside the chord, which is cool, and that's actually a kind of resolution that matters. But most of the resolutions need to go somewhere. So like a short resolution into the downbeat. What I mean by land is that the last note falls on the first beat of the next chord. So 1, 2, 3, and 4, and a 1, 2, 3, and 4, and a 1, 2, 3, and 4, and a 1. Right? So short resolution. It could be even shorter. 2, 3, 4, and. Right? That's a really short resolution. Just and 1. But it lands on the downbeat of the next chord, and it sets you up to play the A. So you could also have a long resolution. Still lands on the 1 of the next measure. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. Right? So short resolution, long resolution. Now, this actually really parallels the way a lot of blues vocals go, right? Like every day I have the blues, right? So short resolution, every day. Right? Every day I have the blues. And then there's this big gap at the end of the line. Right? And what usually happens is, well, that's where the guitar fill is, or the piano or the harmonica fill. So you can think of this as a short resolution, a long resolution, and then an echo resolution, right? Like you've already landed back on the 1 chord, but then there's sort of more to say. And that also lands back on the 1, but it kind of echoes that longer resolution. So 3 pieces to the line: a short resolution, a long resolution, an echo resolution. So now where do your chord substitutions go? Any place you have space. Right, so you can throw away you can take that echo resolution and do it with chords. Say it with chords, right? So here's your short resolution. Here's a couple of chord substitutions. Here's an E over G sharp, taking you to A7. Long resolution. And now for my echo resolution, I'm just going to walk up through a B chord, a diminished chord that takes me back to E, and then a 4 chord, going temporarily to the 4, and then back to 1. So now I've got this whole first 4 bars. And I could keep going. The answer to the question is the chord substitutions go wherever the licks aren't. So the call and response is, for the first line, a short resolution, a long resolution. Use your chord substitutions in between, and then on the last line, basically wherever the turnaround would go, you can fill that out with chord substitutions as well. So that's one way to do that. So hope that answers the question. From Lewis, how important is hand placement for picking? Should you plant your hand down? Okay, well, so I've kind of already made the case for the way that I like to have my hand resting here, right? But there's a whole school of people who, again, you can see that, rest their pinky or their ring finger on the face of the guitar, and that's like a Stephen Grossman thing, and I guess a lot of the older country blues guys did that. And again, so then you don't get that like palm muted thing, you get something that's more open. I never was comfortable doing that, and so by default, when I was wearing the thumb pick, I would rest my hand here, and that's kind of just where I took it. So again, super personal choice. I like to be planted, but I like to do it with my palm as opposed to with my pinky or my ring finger, but both are options. Let's see. I answered the questions about the guitar. And we talked about the palm muting. And what are my thoughts on new tone strings? I have never played them. I have played those Elixir strings when they first came out, and I did not like them. They felt like plastic to me. I was still using finger picks, and the finger picks also tend to chew up the strings, so I never really got with those kind of strings that last forever kind of strings. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Jim. Yes, it's a 24.9 inch scale. Thanks. That clarifies that. Okay, here's a good one. Suggestions on learning how to keep time. That's from Dennis. And let's see if there's anything else after that. Oh, do I think in terms of notes or intervals? Also a good question. And from Bruce. Hey, Bruce. Can the lead or solo come in on the first beat, or is the rule come in on beat 2? With the phrasing, what Bruce is talking about there, I always teach it in this very sort of specific way, but it's flexible. The important thing is to get the model in mind of like that phrases resolve, and that some of them are long and some of them are short, and some of them echo what's already happened. But when you listen to real music, it's all over the map. The idea is just to have like a template to look at, so you can see everything as like, oh, is it doing this? Is it doing something like this? Is it doing something even close to this? Oh, is it doing something completely different? Because you can find blues songs that don't follow that kind of phrasing, and you can find people who play all kinds of phrases. But it's good to have a place to start, and that's a pretty good template and a pretty good, it's not universal, but it's pretty common. And it helped me organize my thoughts about improvising in a way that I hadn't been able to before, when I started to kind of do this little taxonomy of like, well, these are the 4 or 5 most likely resolutions you could have. And this is the way that I teach improvising, because I find that the biggest gap for people is between playing by rote, like I learned this tab and I play it this way, and being able to just sit and wing it. And for a lot of people, there's this big gap in the middle. And part of the problem is that the people that you watch that you think are completely winging it often are not. They're often playing from a vocabulary of licks, and they're just kind of stringing them together, and they're maybe having an inspired moment once in a while. But a lot of people are just, just combining and recombining. It's, a lot of people that, we talk about this in the membership, and a lot of people talk about it as it feels kind of like having like a set of Legos finally. It's like, well, you put these blocks together. And that sounds kind of stiff and uncreative too, but the fact is, like, you need a vocabulary. You need a bunch of things to put together. And the more you absorb that vocabulary and practice mixing and matching it, the more it will become your own. You'll start to adapt it and like take little things out and put other things in without even realizing it. It's more just my little soapbox here is that like people often think about and teach and try to learn improvising in terms of scales. What scales do I need to know? Really, like, yeah, that's important. Like, scales just kind of represent the collection of possible notes, but it's phrasing and and the rhythmic value of what you're doing that makes it really sound like music. Right? You can learn a blues scale, but we all know that just doing that sounds like scales, right? It's when you can play. And at that point, it almost doesn't matter what you're playing, right? Because you could be playing or. But once you have that kind of rhythmic model, all those licks are the same rhythm. They sound good because they have good phrasing. Not because, partly because of the scale they are, but the scale itself doesn't make them work. It's the phrasing and the timing and all of that. And that's something you can learn. I feel like I missed a question up here. Oh, learning to keep time. Yeah. Speaking of time, I'm going to keep this one kind of short, but it's a great question. Most important thing is to use a metronome. Second most important thing is to use the metronome to not as something to catch up to, but as something to simply measure and mark time. And third important thing is to learn to hear the metronome on beats 2 and 4 instead of all 4 beats. And why I say those things is that most of us have had bad experiences with the metronome where you go, oh, this piece is supposed to be played at speed X. Set the metronome at speed X, try to catch up to it, feel discouraged and depressed, throw the metronome out the window. But really, the metronome is just for calibration. And the example I always give is like, if you were gonna put a new door in your house, you wouldn't eyeball it, right? You wouldn't like go, yeah, I think I'm gonna cut this big rectangle out, and then I'm gonna bring this door over and hope that it fits. Like, you'd get out a T-square and you'd get out a level and you'd get out a ruler and you'd measure what was going on and you'd make sure that the door was going to fit before you started cutting. And all the metronome does is tell you where time is, like a ruler tells you, where the inches are. Like, it just tells you where the beats are. And so you can practice putting the beats evenly apart from each other so that when you're playing your bass, you've practiced spacing them out evenly. And so that, you're putting them on each beat as opposed to a little bit ahead of the beat, a little bit behind the beat, and then you can start to mess around with things, but you have to know where the beat is in order to mess around with it. And so the thing about putting the metronome on 2 and 4 is, like, if you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, right? That's one way to do it. If you cut the metronome in half, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You've got this groove now, because now the metronome, or in this case my foot, and you should actually use the metronome, not your foot. I'm just doing it because it's easier. Now the metronome sounds like the backbeat. It sounds like the snare on 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. And it starts to help you put a bit of weight on 2 and 4, which is part of what makes blues in particular and roots music in general groove. That's what makes it feel the way that it feels. So if you can practice hearing the metronome that way, it'll help you build your groove and your sense of time. Okay, we'll do a couple more. Try to wrap this up around the top of the hour. I answered that question. Okay. From Serge, do you think in notes or intervals? Intervals, for sure. Want to picture a chord, and what's going to work over it. I'm totally, if I have to, I can sit down and go, okay, we're on an E chord, so that's got to be an E, and that's got to be an F sharp, and oh yeah, that's C sharp, I know that's C sharp, right? Oh, the 7th, yeah, that's D natural, right? But I'm mostly thinking about it in terms of, oh yeah, this is the root, and this is the 9th, and this is the 6th. So that's really like probably what I meant to grab. There's the flat 7, the root, and the 5. And if you can find the root and the 5, then, if you can find the root, you can find the notes that you want scale-wise, because the flat 3rd's always right above, 3 frets above the root. There's the 5th, the flat 5 is below the 5th, the 4th is below the 5th. Oh yeah, the flat 7, that's below the root, and there's the 6, that's below the root. And if you can find all that around the root, then you can go to another position. There's my root. You want to be able to get around the neck. It's like, well, find roots, and then find the notes around the root that do what you want them to do melodically. And that'll go a long way towards helping you feel like you can break out of open position. Even though I love open position, and there's plenty of great music to play there. Okay. Let's see. Do I have warm-up exercises or hand stretching exercises? To be honest, no. And if I don't play for a while and then I play a lot, I get blisters on my thumbs and my hands kind of ache the next day. So I try to just play some and not forget to play. But I don't really have anything specific to suggest. Yeah, I'm a terrible practicer in that respect. It's probably a really good idea. Let's see. How do you translate the skills from playing blues into playing folk or country? That's a good question. And can you use major pentatonic? Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to answer the pentatonic question, and then I'm going to answer the question about folk and country, and then I'm going to start to wrap things up. So major and minor pentatonic, again, like they're just two different flavors. And so if you know where the root is, you can find the minor pentatonic, and you can find the major pentatonic. And most blues playing that I like is kind of an interplay between those two sounds. And I like when there's a little bit of each, like when it's minor and bluesy. I like when there's a little bit of major coming in with like the major sixth, contrasting with the minor third. And I also like when I'm playing sort of more of a major sound, hearing a little bit of flat seven in there too. Right, the third and the seventh. So when I teach more like single note improvisation, which I don't do too much anymore, but when I was teaching like sort of jump blues and swing and Charlie Christian and all that, really the emphasis is on like knowing what both those sounds are and finding them relative to where the root is. You know, there's the root and the fifth and the flat seven, and then there's the major third. But where are the blue notes? Well, there's the flat third, there's the flat seven, and where's the flat five? So at any moment, you can make that distinction between bright sounds and my favorite music is just an interplay between those two things anyway. So they both work, but they're both at their best, I think, when it's not one or the other, but it's an interplay between the two sounds, major and minor pentatonic. Okay, last question I said I would get to. How do you translate the skills from playing blues to playing folk or country? That's a really good question. And I'm not sure if you mean that in a very fingerstyle specific way or otherwise. But, excuse me, 9-Pound Hammer is a good example. Because even though it's a bluesy tune, it's from the country repertoire, right? So almost like the scales are like this micro version of like, you know, alternating those two things, major and minor pentatonic. Repertoire, blues and country have a ton of overlap, right? Like not all blues is, right? Because what's, you know, what are those early Muddy Water songs? You know, like, like Can't Be Satisfied and all that stuff. I mean, it sounds like, you know, it's got that 2-beat feel. Even Got My Mojo Working has a 2-beat feel. You know, and then there's country stuff that's super bluesy, like I was saying, like so. Right, it's a kind of a dominant, funky kind of sound, and that's probably, you know, that's half of why Tommy Emmanuel can use it as this like springboard for this improvisation, because he's basically playing an 8-bar blues, right? And all these tunes, like a lot of the tunes that I teach, a lot of these tunes that are like the public domain tunes that make it into the repertoire of my membership course, you know, I learned them in both contexts, you know, like Trouble in Mind. You can hear Bob Wills do it as Western Swing. You can hear, you know, I don't know if Bobby Bland does it, but you can hear like, you know, like hardcore blues artists do Trouble in Mind. Freddie King, I think. Feel free to correct me. You know, then you can hear like tons of country artists do it. So the repertoire is really blurry, right? When you get those classic songs. I mean, St. James Infirmary, I grew up thinking of it as like, oh, that's like a folk song that Dave Van Ronk does. It's a Louis Armstrong like set piece from the 20s. You know, everybody's done that song. So if you can learn like how to play like a steady bass, you know, shuffle, and you can learn how to play like an alternating thumb 2-beat, you can play country and blues, you know. And for fingerstyle, that's the thing that's so great about it, is like you can play these different styles of music and it can all kind of come together on the guitar. So, you know, repertoire, it's a very flexible thing. And that's why when I teach my monthly lessons, I do it from like a repertoire point of view. It's like the first thing is, so as far as the Fingerstyle 5 goes, like, and if you want to find out more about that, all you have to do is go to my website, which is fretboardconfidential.com. And there's like stuff right there about it. But it's basically, the idea is like tunes. Like, here are some tunes we're going to learn, but we're going to use those tunes to also learn how to groove better, get the thumb and the fingers coordinated, how to improvise by learning this sort of like step-by-step modular approach to improvising, and also like chord voicings. Like, we're going to arrange these songs, we're going to find chords at the neck, and then we're going to learn how to like put the whole song together by creating intros and a shout chorus and breaking up different versions of the melody with some solos and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's like when someone says, "Hey, can you play guitar or play something?" Like, nobody wants you to play exercises, right? They want you to play a song. That's what Joe Pass said about how he learned to play solo jazz guitar, like how to play tunes, is that his parents would drag him into the living room when friends were over when he was a kid and say, "Come on, Joe, play something on the guitar." And he was like, they didn't want to hear me play Charlie Parker solos. They wanted to hear me play Night and Day. They wanted to hear me play something by, Gershwin. So I learned how to like sit in a room by myself and play a song, which is what most of us want to be able to do if we're playing fingerstyle. It's just, can you sit in a room and play a song and make it sound cool? And then you have something to take out with you if you go to play with other people, or, if you sing. Then if you spent this time learning how to tighten your groove and learning how to improvise, then when you go to play a song with words, you've got all this other ammo, right? You can play a song and then you can take a solo. If you go into an open mic and you play a song like 9-Pound Hammer or Trouble in Mind, or one of your own songs, like if you write songs, and you can, like, first of all, if you can finger pick and hold the groove together, like, that'll be cool. But, if you can get to the end of the verse and then bust out a solo on your own, it's not a fair fight anymore, My friend Matt Weiner used to play in the Hot Club of Cowtown, which is a Western swing band here in Austin. And he said, we go around, this was years ago when he was touring with them, but it's a 3-piece band. It's guitar and upright and fiddle. And the guitar player and the fiddle player are both amazing. It's Whit Smith on guitar, who's a great improvising guitar player, and Alana Fremerman on fiddle, and they both play their butts off. But, Matt said, it's not a fair fight. We go in to play these like coffee house series where they've been listening to one singer-songwriter after another for a year, and then we come in, there's 3 of us, and we can improvise. It's like Led Zeppelin to them, So if you can play a real groove, and you can do more than just that pattern picking stuff, and then you can like bust out a little bit of a solo or a bit of a shout chorus, or like a cool bit of guitar stuff in between, like, it's just going to make the song that much cooler, because it's doing this thing in context that makes the singing and the songwriting sound even better. And if you want to just be able to sit and just wing it and just sit on your porch and play blues, the same skills apply, So anyway, you can think about it that way if you want, and those are the kind of skills that I like to show people. There's also a ton of free stuff you can find. I have a YouTube channel, and I have a tab for like a ton of the stuff that's on the YouTube channel. So here's the other place you can go. And if you go there and put in your email, then you can get access to like a boatload of PDFs of most of the stuff I've done in the last couple of years on the channel. Some of the older stuff I didn't tab out at the beginning, but there's like whole choruses of blues. There's examples of like different kinds of bass lines, different kind of blues licks, different kinds of voicings. And a lot of them are just like, when you get done learning it, it's like you've learned a whole chorus of blues. And so it's something you can like sit and play. Hey, David Friel, nice to see you. I'll play a little bit just to close things out. Nice to see you all here. I'd be happy to do more question and answer because it's really fun to do. So if you've got questions, you can always email them to me through the website, or you can post them in the comments below this video if you're watching it later, and I'll collect them and save them for the next time. And if there's something else you want to see lessons on that's fingerstyle related, let me know. And if I can do it, maybe I will. So thanks for being here. Again, you can just go to fretboardconfidential.com to find more lessons and more about my membership. And thanks for being here.
Thank you.